It was a Sunday morning in February when a grandmother sat at home watching her grandson, the way she had done so many times before. She tried calling her daughter. The phone rang. Someone picked up, but instead of a greeting, she heard voices, raised, tense, arguing. Then the line went dead. She called back. Nothing. She called again. Silence. So she got in her car, drove to the Bell Creek Square apartments on Farmington Road in Livonia, Michigan, and flagged down the first police officer she saw on the street. When officers finally entered that townhouse, they found a toddler wandering the master bedroom alone, soiled diaper, no idea what had just happened feet away from him. In the living room, 2 bodies. 2 guns, multiple shell casings scattered across the floor. One of those bodies was wearing the same badge that had been her identity, her purpose, her pride. How does a woman trained to protect others end up unable to protect herself? But how did we get here? Welcome to True Crime Unveiled 247, where silence is broken and hidden truths are exposed. To our returning subscribers, thank you for standing with us. May you and your loved ones always remain safe. If you are new here, take a second right now to subscribe. Not just for us, but to join a community that believes every victim deserves their full story told. Your support keeps this channel going and allows us to cover the cases the world tries to forget. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and let's uncover the truth together. Today's case involves a young mother, a badge, a secret she never reported, and the man she called her partner. Before we go any further, here are 4 things you need to know about this case. 1. Maria Martin was only 22 years old. 2. The man who killed her was a fellow Detroit police officer. 3. Her 2 young children were connected to that home. 4. Despite months of abuse, Maria never filed a single official report, not once. And that last fact is the one that should stop all of us cold. Why do you think victims who work inside law enforcement stay silent about abuse? Drop your answer in the comments, because that question is going to follow us through this entire story. Maria, she was a Detroit girl who grew up wanting to make a difference. She had the kind of personality that made people feel safe around her, warm, driven, the type of person who showed up fully to everything she did. When she joined the Detroit Police Department, she became exactly what the department needed. A young officer who took the job seriously. Colleagues described her as a model cop. Not because she was perfect, but because she cared. She cared about the people she served. She cared about doing things the right way. But the most important title Maria ever held had nothing to do with her badge. She was a mother, 2 young children. And by every account from those who knew her, those kids were everything to her. Her reason for every early morning, every long shift, every sacrifice. At 22, Maria Martin had already built a life worth protecting. And then there was Matthew. Matthew Ethington II was 26 years old, also a Detroit police officer. On the surface, he carried himself with the kind of confidence that comes from wearing a uniform. Charming when he needed to be. Composed in public. A man who knew exactly how to present himself. But there was something important about Matthew that matters deeply to this story. When he met Maria, he was still a married man. He was going through a divorce at the time, something he reportedly described to those around him as simply an unhappy marriage. As though it were a minor inconvenience rather than a legal and emotional commitment he was still bound to. And yet, he pursued Maria anyway, a man who hadn't fully left one relationship before trying to anchor himself in another. That detail alone tells you something about how Matthew Ethington operated. He didn't wait. He moved fast, and once he had Maria's attention, he held on to it like something that belonged to him. Does someone moving on that quickly from a marriage raise red flags for you? Let us know what you think below. Those closest to Maria began noticing things early on. Matthew was possessive. He monitored her movements. He wanted to know where she was, who she was with, what she was doing. And when the answers weren't what he wanted, the tension was immediate. To the outside world, 2 young officers, building a life together. Behind that image, something much darker was already taking hold. As months passed, the people who loved Maria began seeing a version of her they didn't recognize. She became quieter, more withdrawn. The spark that people associated with her, the warmth, the humor, started dimming in ways that were hard to ignore but even harder to address. Her sister would eventually come forward with what the family had been carrying in private. Maria had been enduring domestic abuse. Not a single incident, not a misunderstanding, a pattern, ongoing, hidden from official record but very much felt by those around her. And here is the part of this story that is almost impossible to process. Maria was a police officer. She responded to domestic violence calls. She knew the protocol. She knew the resources. She knew, better than most people, exactly what domestic abuse looked like from the inside. And still, she never filed a report. Not one. What does it say about our system when the very person trained to help domestic violence victims cannot bring herself to become one on paper? The reasons victims stay silent are complicated. Fear, love, shame, the hope that things will change. But for an officer, there is an additional layer that most people don't consider. Reporting a fellow officer means entering a system you work within every single day. It means your colleagues knowing. It means your career potentially being affected. It means the man with a gun and a badge knowing you went on record against him. Maria stayed silent, and the abuse continued. The final days before February 19th, 2023 carried a weight that people around Maria could feel but couldn't stop. Her mother was a constant presence in her life, babysitting regularly, deeply involved with her grandchildren, just a phone call away. The bond between Maria and her mother was the kind that keeps a family held together. On the morning of Sunday, February 19th, Maria's mother called her daughter. Somewhere between 6:30 and 7 in the morning. Maria answered, but her mother could hear it immediately, arguing in the background. Voices elevated. Something was wrong inside that apartment, and then the line went dead. She called back. No answer. Called again. Nothing. Remember that moment, because every minute that passed after that phone call matters. By approximately 12:30 in the afternoon, Maria's mother had made her way to the Bell Creek Square apartments on Farmington Road near 6 Mile in Livonia, Michigan. She was outside that building, frantic, unable to reach her daughter for hours, when she spotted a Livonia police officer nearby. She flagged him down. She told him what she knew. The argument she'd heard, the unanswered calls, the silence that didn't make sense. Officers approached the townhouse. They went inside. What they found in that master bedroom was a toddler, alone, in a soiled diaper, wandering without any understanding of what had already happened in the room just beyond him. He was unharmed. His parents were not. In the living room, Maria Martin, 22 years old, multiple gunshot wounds, gone. Beside her, Matthew Ethington II, 26 years old, a single gunshot wound self-inflicted, 2 handguns on the floor, multiple spent shell casings. A home that had once held a family, now a crime scene. 1 small child too young to speak. 2 young lives now without their mother. Take a moment with that. 2 guns, 2 officers. One of them chose to end her life before ending his own, rather than let her simply live without him. Detroit Police Chief James White confirmed both were members of the Detroit Police Department, officers with fewer than 5 years on the force. When the people trained to respond to tragedy become the victims of it, what does that tell us about how this country handles domestic violence? Livonia Police Department led the investigation, working alongside Detroit PD as the case involved 2 of their own officers. The scene itself told investigators much of what they needed to know. The physical evidence was consistent with a domestic violence murder-suicide, a term that somehow never fully captures the horror of what it actually means. But reconstructing the full picture of what Maria had endured required going beyond the physical evidence, because on paper, there was almost nothing. No police reports, no official complaints, no documented incidents. Investigators had to piece together the abuse through the people who had witnessed it quietly, the family members, the people close to Maria who had seen the changes in her and said nothing officially because Maria herself had asked them not to. Her sister became one of the most important voices in the aftermath. She stepped forward publicly and spoke about what Maria had been living through, the control, the jealousy, the fear. She gave Maria's silence a name. Domestic abuse experts who examined the case spoke to a pattern that appears in controlling relationships with devastating consistency. Isolation from support systems, constant monitoring, emotional manipulation that convinces the victim that leaving will only make things worse. And jealousy. Matthew Ethington's jealousy, according to those who knew the relationship, was not occasional or circumstantial. It was consuming. It was the lens through which he saw everything. Her colleagues, her friendships, her independence, her very existence outside of him. A man who had pursued her while still legally married to someone else. Already demonstrating an inability to accept boundaries, had spent months tightening his grip on Maria's life. This was not a sudden act. The people who knew them say the warning signs had been building for a long time. Which raises the question, what would it have taken for someone to step in? Have you or someone you know ever stayed silent about abuse out of fear? You don't have to share details, just a yes or no in the comments tells us more than you know. The Detroit Police Department mourned publicly. Flags, tributes. Fellow officers who had worked alongside Maria, processing a kind of grief that doesn't have a clean category because she wasn't killed in the line of duty in the traditional sense. She was killed by someone who wore the same uniform. That distinction mattered to a lot of people inside the department. Maria's children, her reason for everything, were now left to grow up without her. 2 young lives that will carry February 19, 2023 with them forever, shaped by a mourning they were too young to fully understand. Her sister chose not to grieve in silence. She spoke. She told Maria's story publicly, because she understood that silence had already taken enough. Maria's family made a vow. Her love for her children, her dedication to her badge, and the person she was would not be reduced to a headline or a statistic. The larger reality this case forced into public conversation is one that law enforcement institutions across the country have been slow to address. Studies have shown that domestic violence occurs at significantly higher rates in law enforcement households than in the general population. Officers have access to firearms. They understand police procedure. They know how investigations work. And victims who are also officers face a unique trap. The system designed to protect them is the same system they fear. Maria never called for help, not officially. And the question that her case leaves open, uncomfortably, painfully open, is whether the system would have protected her, even if she had. Should police departments be required to have completely independent, confidential reporting channels for officers experiencing abuse from fellow officers, separate from internal affairs, separate from their chain of command? Tell us what you think in the comments. Maria Martin was 22 years old. She was a mother before she was an officer. She was a daughter before she was a public servant. She was a sister, a friend, a woman who got up every morning and put on a uniform to protect people who would never know her name. She deserved that same protection. She never got it. Her children will grow up knowing their mother was brave, not just in the ways that earned her a badge, but in the quiet, invisible ways that no one gave her credit for while she was still here. Maria never filed a report. Matthew was still someone's husband when he entered her life. 2 children lost their mother on an ordinary Sunday morning. And somewhere in the space between all of those facts, a life that should still be here is gone. If one person had pushed harder, would she still be here? That's the question I want you to sit with. Leave your answer below. If Maria's story moved you, share this video. Say her name. Because the least we can do for the people we lose to silence is make sure the world doesn't forget them quietly. Subscribe to True Crime Unveiled 247 and turn on notifications, because next time we uncover another case that the world nearly allowed to disappear.